I've laid out the parts we're going to need for this step. We have the components for what's called the neck box, which will house one of the 3 servos that we're going to use at this point. We have the neck, where we'll start putting together the components that will attach DO's head to the neck box. We have this bar assembly. This is going to connect all of this to the main body, and we have various caps and components to that. We're going to need wire, DuPont connectors, various hardware, and of course the crimp for the connectors. So part of today is going to be creating wiring harnesses and putting together 3D printed parts. Now I'm not going to permanently attach any of the 3D printed parts with epoxy. Well, maybe a few parts I will. But mainly I want to make sure that I can disassemble this again for painting. So there may be some things today that we'll use hot glue on for some temporary part placement. So these are the parts involved for today. I'm going to clear off some space and we'll begin the assembly process. Before I start today, I would like to give some credit to Michael Badley for the design work on the 3D printed parts that I have here, and also to Andy Aprisco for the instructions that he wrote on how to assemble the DO droid. Now with that, I'm going to begin by installing the servo into the neck box frame, and we'll mount that in the neck box. One of the things that I've already done is to hot glue one of the captive nuts that we've seen in other stages of the DO assembly. Next, what I want to do is talk about the orientation of the servo. So we have a little MG90S servo here, and the orientation into the frame is going to be with this square block that we have that nut mounted in, facing upwards. The cable coming out of the servo facing to the right, and then it just mounts in here in that orientation. That's done. So we have the servo mounted in there correctly, and now we need to orient it into the head box itself. If you can see down in here, there are some slots that the frame slides into. First thing we have to do is to make sure that we have this face up. So the bottom has a cutout all the way. The top has a cosmetic piece here with some ridges printed into it. That's the top. We want the servo body on the bottom facing out towards us, and then we'll just test fit this in here. Get it lined up into those slots on both sides, and it fits in like that. I will be mixing up a little 2-part epoxy. We're using the Gorilla Glue to hold this in, and I'll go ahead and do that because this is not something I'll ever need to disassemble again for painting, so I want to make sure that that's permanently secured in there. While we have some epoxy mixed up, there are a few parts that we need to get set up for this. One is the servo horn and the servo coupler for mounting the neck and head box bar. So we've got 2 pieces that we need to epoxy together before we mount to the servo, and then we just have a small support bar that needs to go into this as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put that together now. We have to be careful in this process not to block the hole, the mounting hole in the servo horns, so we'll be careful there. And then I think to make sure that this is a really good fit, we're going to reinforce it in here with a little bit more epoxy, maybe a little bit under here as well. Okay, we'll set that aside to dry. And then this little reinforcement bar is going to fit just down in here. There are a couple of slots in there that they fit into, so it'll be just as simple as putting just a little bit of epoxy on the end to hold it in, and then inserting it. That's all put together. So a little bit of drying time, and we'll be ready to deal more with those. Some time has passed, and now the glue has dried on the servo horn and servo coupler that we're going to be using to attach the head box bar to the head box. So a couple of things we're going to have to do here is there's a captive nut that has to go into the servo coupler. So I'm going to do that, hot glue it in, then we'll mount the servo coupler to the servo and the head bar arm to the head bar box. So let's start with putting that together. So the way this should orient is with the top of the head box facing up, and the top is always the part that has this mounting point, this square spot at the top. We want to have the servo horn facing up and mount it there to the servo. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so that's the way that should be oriented. And looking through the end, you can see where we're going to have to put the servo screw in there to secure the horn. We've got it. Now all that leaves us is to mount the head box bar to the head box, and this will face down, with this being the top of the head box, and this bar is what's going to secure the head box to the main frame of the DO droid. So we'll just get that screw secured. I'm using a M3 15mm screw. We'll tighten that in, and now we have the head box bar secured. Here's where we're going to need to start getting our wire put together that's going to connect all of this up, because we're going to have to feed the wire through some of the tracks in parts like the head box bar here. So I'm going to cut several pieces of wire and get things ready to thread up through there so that we'll have wires that go up to the head, because there are a total of 3 servos that control the head, and then we'll need a route for all that wiring to go down to the main frame of the droid. I took a minute just to cut some wire lengths, and I have 2 feet and some change on the wire length, about 26-27 inches, and I'm sure we'll be cutting that down much shorter. All 3 of the servos in the head and neck area are going to share a common power lead. So when you hook up your radio control, you're not having individual power to each of the ports on the radio receiver. They're really all just sharing a common voltage bus. So we're going to just use 2 wires to get power to all 3 of the servos. We've got 3 other wires that will carry the signal to the servos, so 1 for each of the 3 servos in the head box and head area. These I used 22 gauge wire for. And then 20 gauge for the power leads. That's probably a bit overkill, but there should be no difficulty in containing that size wire group or wire loom in the space that we have. So that's what I had on hand, so that's what we're going to use. Now we've got the wires pulled through the head box and through this frame inside where the servo's at. It's a little bit fiddly pulling the wire that I have. I have a silicon insulated wire, so the nice thing about it is it's just very flexible, but it doesn't slide super well when you're pulling the wire through tight spaces. Now the fun part is we're going to pull the wires through this top skin. Now we have our wiring at least run through at this point so that we have it ready to go down the head bar. So something like that. Now we're going to add the neck to the top of the neck box. And this has got a cutout in it that's shaped similarly to the sort of half moon shaped cutout there. That's where the wires are going to go through, and that's what we'll need to line up. And then when we attach this, you can see we have our screw hole, and then down through here, that's how that will line up. So that will be a fairly quick job. With that in place, we just need to line this up and insert the screw. There we have the neck attached to the head box. Also, I have this kind of neat little tool that if you ever have trouble with your magnetic screwdriver holding onto a screw that you have to get down through an area like that neck, it's just this little gripping tool, screw gripping tool that came in a computer tool kit that I got years ago. Just has some little prongs, it'll hold the screw, let you get in there and get it started. Works really well for that. We're going to mount another servo in the neck, and it will be another one of the MG90 servos. We'll be using the single horn and the 2 self-tapping screws that came with the servo, along with the servo arm attachment screw there. You can see that there's the mounting location for the servo in there. It's kind of hard to get good light in there, but you can see the servo mounting location. So this will sit down in there. There's a notch in here to stop the, it's impossible to see, but there's a notch down in there for where the wire to the servo goes. So once we get it down there in place, that should slip in. It's a little bit fiddly getting the servo down in there, but I'll hold this so you can see the orientation. The narrow part of the servo facing down where the wire is. And now I'll just get those self-tapping screws in there and we'll get this attached. Now we have 2 of the servos mounted in the head box assembly, where the wires are up through the neck, down through the head bar. So far, so good. Now all we have to do is attach the servo horn So I'll get it at the right angle of the light. You can see the servo horn is facing downward with the head box in that position. That's starting to come together and kind of look like something. Now we're going to be putting this top neck piece onto the top of that servo. And like we've done in other places, we're going to use epoxy to hold it to the servo horn. Now this also has a spot for another servo itself, so that's where the third servo is going to go. But I'm going to have to kind of test fit this, fish some wires around, see how it goes on, and then it will be time for more epoxy. So that is more or less where it's going to fit. And I will mix up some epoxy and we'll see if we can get this now attached down to the top of that servo horn. I'm going to have to be careful not to get any epoxy where the screw attaches down in there, or I'll never get this apart again, and I definitely am going to want to take this apart again for servicing and also for painting. So now I'll go mix up some epoxy. Okay, that's in place. Now all we're going to need to do is wait for this epoxy to set. And then I'll probably fill in a little more on the top just to make sure that we have a good, nice, tight fit. Now it's time to get ready to put on the head plate. This will go inside the cone-shaped head of the D0 droid, and we're going to have to get some screws and such set up, and another servo that goes in the neck here to connect this all up. So this will be a third pivot point for the neck and head assembly. So that's a pretty easy step. We're basically just going to thread through a 25mm M3 bolt through this hole right here, if I can manipulate my fingers in such a way as to get it in there. So might have to use my handy tool. I'm going to use a washer on here. The instructions I've been following don't say anything about this, but it just seems like rather than have a nut right up against the plastic, I would rather have a washer in there to protect it. So this is going to be a pivot point for the neck to attach to the head plate. So got a ways to go here, but you kind of get the idea that we'll have a pivot point there. And then there's a second nut that goes on here. That is something that we'll use as an adjustment. So I'm not going to thread that all the way on. And probably some Loctite or a locking nut's not a bad idea here. And in the final assembly, I will probably apply some Loctite there. Here's where the third servo comes in. So it's just another MG90S servo. So first off, we have to figure out the orientation of this particular servo. This is going to go with the wire down. And we're going to have to thread through our wire here first. So that's going to be a trick. Okay, I'm going to go off camera and fiddle with this. The wire will not quite pass through that hole, so I'm going to have to do a little sanding and filing. After a little sanding and fiddling, I did get that servo finally to fit in there. So now we're going to go ahead and finally put in those 2 screws to secure it. The design of this is really nice. It leaves access holes in other printed parts so that you can get a screwdriver in to do this. There we go. Servo is mounted in. Now that the servo's in there, we'll get the servo horn on, and it just goes straight up onto the servo. There we go. To get the head plate ready, like we've done many times before, we'll have to install a square nut in here that will later secure another screw. And I think that one's going to fit nice and tight without any hot glue. Hot dog. To attach the head plate, we have a screw sticking out here that we're going to slip through here, sort of as an axle shaft. And then in the back of the head plate is a cutout that fits right around the bottom of the servo horn. So we can fix this whole thing or adjust this whole thing just by moving this nut in and out. We get a tight fit. We don't have to worry about epoxy. I am going to get one more washer just to put on here. So we'll slide this on. Then this will slip right over the servo horn. And we can spin this screw back out. And now we have that held in place. I'll probably put a second nut in there that will just lock that one up tight. For now, again, we're not doing this as a permanent type of a setup, so I'm not worried about doing Loctite or locking nuts or anything like that at this point. This is all a test fit and then a trial run to make sure that all of our work is correct. The next thing we're going to do is to create the wiring harness for the head box and the head. So we're going to have to put some connectors on here. One of the things we're going to do is pull the power and ground out of each of the servo looms, and we're going to combine those together and connect them to our red and black wires. And then all we'll have to do is to deal with the signal wires for each of the servos. So we are going to clip off the servo connectors for this, and this will be a semi-permanent wire job. If we need to take it apart, we are always able to pull the loom back out of here. My other option is to have a thick connector that can handle 3 of these servo bundles. I don't really want to do that. Now that we have the ground and the power lead done, each of these is a signal wire, each of the orange ones is a signal wire to the different servos. and we're going to connect those up to our different signal wires here. Okay, so we have the first rat's nest done here up in the neck and head, but that's all going to be hidden inside of the cone that makes up the head, so we're not going to see a lot of this wiring. We may get a hint of it in here, but the head also comes down around there too, so I think it'll be pretty well concealed in the end product. Then the other thing we're going to need to do is to start to make the wire loom on the other end. But before we do that, I think we need to kind of secure some of this wiring in place. Before I run the wires down through the channel here in the head bar arm, there is a little square spot in there for a nut to go into, and I want to slide that or drop that in place. There we go. So I dropped a little square nut in there, and now we want to run the wiring down through this channel. And this wire will also hold that nut in place. We're going to put this sleeve on so that it will cover up the wiring in the head box bar. So I need to thread the wires through here. And we can slide that trim piece up into place, so now all of our wires are hidden inside. We have this cap that goes over the top of the bar skin to hold that in place, and it should be a bit of a tight fit and go on there. Mine is not, so I may go ahead and put a little tape or something in there to tighten it up just a little bit. There we go. Now we've got a good tight fit on that. Now we have the main bar holder. This will secure the head box and head box arm to the main chassis of the droid. So I'm going to need to thread the wires through and out the back of this, and then secure this onto the bottom. All right, now there's that nut that we put in the arm has a corresponding screw hole. So I'm just going to put a short, either 8 or 10 millimeter screw in there just to hold that on. Probably the shorter the better, because I don't want to screw into the wires and put pressure on them. So I'll try the shortest size first. There we are. So we have our head box assembly, the neck, our head plate, our 3 motion servos, and then our head bar arm and all of our wiring here. So we're getting someplace. There should be a hole here. When it prints, there is a thin layer of plastic there, but I can just take a drill bit and I should be able to push through and drill that out really quickly here. Just be careful not to catch any of the wires. So with that hole opened up there, there's a nut that slides in behind it once again, and this is to hold on a cap. So there'll be a cap once this is all secured that will screw on over the top of that. And the fun part is getting that nut down in that tiny slot. Now we have a cosmetic cap that is going to slide over the top of this, but it needs the screw that goes into that corresponding nut, so we need a little epoxy again, and we're going to cement the nut or the screw into the center of the cap. Okay, we've got a dab of epoxy in there. Actually, a little more than a dab. We're going to push that screw down in, and hopefully that's going to be secure. And we're not going to do anything with that for quite a while. Okay, the next thing we'll do is to trim off these wires, and I'm going to fit a plug on. Now, dexterity might be a bit of a problem for me here. These are small and fiddly, and sometimes that's a challenge. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a whirl, see if I can get these all crimped on. And then I'll probably put the power on one connector, and then we'll do all of the signal lines on another connector. Okay, I am not very dexterous, and those are not easy to crimp. But we got our signal wires done. Now I'll do the plug for the power. Well, I just decided to take my struggles off camera for these DuPont connectors. I did them a little differently than the instructions that I saw. I really don't like there being power to any exposed pins, and that's what I would have had on the other side. So my preference is to keep the unpowered side with those male connectors. I just quickly connected everything together just to see how all of this was going to work, and it seems to be working pretty well. This is the head tilt, and that is the tilt for the whole head box assembly when it's attached. And head turn. So turn, tilt, the only axis where it seems maybe a little bit underpowered is the tilt. But we'll see what that's like when we hook it up and have the other servo mixing with it, because two different servos mix together to do that tilt. So we'll see how it goes. Well, it's nice to see this finally starting to come together and see it come to life as we get the servos and electronics in it. Next time we'll be adding the Arduinos and starting to assemble this all as a single unit so that we can see what the finished product will do. We're going to put the finishing touches down the road. I'll bother painting and doing all the weathering, distressing, aging, all the fun stuff that you do to a model like this after it's completed and we know everything's operated. If you enjoyed watching the video today and seeing the progress, please do give this a like or consider subscribing to follow along for more projects like this. Thanks for watching. Until next time.